Without fail, one of the most important topics that I hear come up from people over and over and over again is when they should be drawing Social Security, how they should be drawing it, and what are the things they should be considering, like the break-even point and other important topics surrounding Social Security. So in today's webinar, we're going to be addressing how it is that most people can go about maximizing their Social Security benefits. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone who shared, once again, someone they knew the moment they were eligible to file, went in and immediately just started drawing benefits. They didn't take the time to do any analysis to see if that was perhaps the best choice for them. And sadly, this happens more often than not. So my earnest hope today is that I'm going to share a lot of information that people are going to be able to take away from this to make better decisions for themselves so they're not leaving tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. So with that being said, let's just jump right in. First and foremost, these are all the necessary disclosures. We have to have them there, so take a moment and check those over if you want. As we indicated, today's title of the webinar is Maximizing Your Social Security Benefits. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Will Snodgrass. I'm a certified financial planner and I lead Matt25 Capital. We are a Christian wealth advisory firm focused on helping families steward their finances wisely and build retirement plans with clarity and confidence. Today, we're diving into, as I mentioned, Social Security, and it is without question one of the most important decisions in retirement planning and often one of the most misunderstood. The session is strictly educational, and everything we cover should be evaluated in the context of your personal situation. If you want with help later, we can certainly talk. Most people underestimate the impact their Social Security decision has on their lifetime income. For many Americans, Social Security represents one third to one half of their total retirement income. And because it's inflation adjusted, dependable, and typically lasts for life, and I know dependability may be questionable for some, it's often the most stable income source in retirement. But here's the part most people don't realize. Studies show that the difference between an optimized strategy and a default strategy can create a six-figure difference in many cases. And that is not a typo. That is not something I'm saying incorrectly. The studies have shown it could result in over 100,000 plus dollars in differences or lost dollars. That doesn't mean everyone will see that outcome, but it shows how significant the decision can be when you look at it over 20 to 30 years. Add that to the fact that married couples have over 2,700 possible filing combinations. And yes, that number is accurate. It is not a typo either. It's no wonder why people feel overwhelmed. But the good news is that you don't need to know all 2,700 plus combinations. You just need to understand the handful of factors that matter most, and that's exactly what we're going to cover today. Now, so let's walk through the filing ages and what they mean because this is the foundation of everything else we're going to be covering. Age 62 is the earliest that you can file. The trade-off, though, if you do start filing or accepting Social Security benefits at that age, is a permanent reduction, typically around 25 to 30% of your monthly benefit, and that is for life. Once you take that reduction, it stays with you permanently throughout the rest of your life. And this also affects survivor benefits if you're married. We'll dive more into that a little later, but that's worth noting and remembering. The next tranche or the next level is full retirement age, which depending on the year you were born is typically 66 to 67 years old. This is when you get your full calculated benefit. There is no reduction for people that are still working. That's an important thing to remember. So if you plan to work past 66 or 67, you can now legally receive your full benefit without having any of your wages docked or your benefits docked because of your other income sources. And for many people, this ends up being a good middle ground, especially if they're still working or don't want to take on the risk of longevity where they're not sure how long they're going to live. However, we're going to be covering this more. Age 70 is an important date also because if you wait until you're 70, your benefit actually will have grown by 8% per year between when you were full retirement age and when you turned 70. Now, it's not an investment return, it's simply how Social Security credits are structured. And these choices are ultimately what can lead to the possible $100,000 plus lifetime impact in many scenarios. Again, especially if you are married. But here's what's important, your filing age shouldn't be chosen in isolation. It needs to line up with your taxes, longevity, spouse's benefits, other income sources, lifestyle needs, retirement goals, etc. None of this should be looked at in a vacuum. It should all be looked at together. It's also worth noting, by the way, while you do see the 8% annual increase between your full retirement age and when you turn 70, once you turn 70, there is no longer the 8% annual increase. So it does not make financial sense to wait longer past 70 years old. We're going to go through a simulation right now or an example that I think will drive some of these points home, especially. So we're going to be looking at a person named Sarah. This is a simple example, but it highlights how filing age alters the total benefits received over a typical retirement. So these numbers you're seeing represent lifetime benefits, how much she would collect if she lives a typical lifespan into her early to mid 80s, which aligns with today's actuarial averages. It's not a prediction, just a standard planning assumption. And granted, it's worth noting, a lot of times when we actually run our planning projections, we're projecting out to 100 to make sure our clients don't outlive their money. But let's get back to the example. So if Sarah files at age 62, her monthly benefit is reduced to about $1,750 a month. Over a typical lifespan into her 80s, she would receive $588,000 total. This lower benefit is permanent and it doesn't reset at her full retirement age. If she files at 67, which is her full retirement age, she receives $2,500 a month. Her total lifetime benefit in this example, assuming she lives the same age as she would have at 62, actually now is $690,000. That is over $100,000 more she would have received over the same lifetime. Okay. Now, if she waits until age 70, again, the 8% annual increases between when she was 67 and when she turned 70, she now would have received $3,100 a month, and her total lifetime benefit would become $744,000. So the real message is this: small monthly differences compound massively over a longer period of time, especially retirement. So if we're looking at this again, the difference between the total lifetime benefit from 62 to 67 would be over $100,000, but the difference in waiting from 67 to age 70 is over $150,000 more. That is a massive, massive difference. And so here's another example here. If, again, reiterating this point a little bit, if Sarah retires at 62 but delays Social Security, those years often create an important, what we call Roth conversion window. And for many people, we get asked about whether they should or shouldn't do Roth conversions. This would actually be a potential opportunity for her to do it. And the reason is it's a tax planning opportunity that can reduce long-term taxes. Now, it's not right for everyone, but it's one more reason filing age needs to be coordinated with your entire financial plan. And we could have a whole nother video just about Roth conversions and why this window is usually ideal to consider those. But we're going to stick to the topic at hand and focus more on Social Security. It's just worth noting that that is an opportunity created depending on when you file for Social Security. So a question we get asked a lot, and I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds who are watching, is what we call the break-even analysis. And it helps answer the question, if I wait to file, how long do I need to live to come out ahead? And here's what the break-even points for typical scenarios usually show. If you're considering between the ages of 62 and 67, where the break-even point would be, meaning when if you waited until you were 67, does the total amount you will have received surpass had you started 5 years earlier? The break-even is usually around age 78 to 80. So figure around 10 or so years. Now, if you're considering the two ages of 67 to 70, the break even usually is around ages 82 to 84. So it's a little bit longer than the first scenario we looked at. If you live beyond those ages, delaying tends to produce more lifetime income in these examples, but this is where break even gets oversimplified. Break even does not consider survivor benefits, taxes, IRA withdrawal strategies, required minimum distributions, Medicare IRMAA brackets, longevity risk, or spousal coordination. So break even is useful, but only as one piece of a broader decision-making framework. And I think that's why when people are considering the break-even analysis, it cannot be looked at in isolation. Again, just a bit, but for married couples, Social Security decisions become significantly more complex and, I would argue, more important. The benefits are connected. One spouse's decision often affects the other spouse's income for life. So, key factors for couples to include and consider: spousal benefits, coordinating ages, who is the higher earning person who has the higher benefit at different stages of filing, survivor benefit impact, income needs now versus later, health and longevity differences. Many couples unintentionally make decisions that work for the short term, but can inadvertently cause long term gaps, especially for the surviving spouse. So, these are just a few things that we need to cover, and it's worth reading through each of those three boxes. You can always pause this if you want or come back to watch the recording later. I think these are things that are worthwhile looking through. So, on to what we mentioned in the last slide, which is the higher earner's critical role. And it really is, especially when it comes to married couples. This is one of the most important concepts in this whole presentation. The higher earner's benefit becomes the survivor's benefit if they pass away first. That means delaying the higher earner's benefit doesn't just strengthen their personal income, it strengthens the surviving spouse's income for potentially 10 to 20 years, depending on how long they live. And since, I'm sorry, men, women statistically outlive men, often by several years, this is a crucial part of planning. So, when we're advising couples, we often focus on how to protect both spouses, not just what feels good today. And again, as a reminder, there is an 8% annual increase for each year that benefits are delayed until 70. And again, there are no more after that. And unfortunately, 70% of widows, are affected who would have benefited had their higher earning husband delayed. I mean, that's a pretty staggering figure when you think about it. 70% of women who end up being widows would have benefited had their husband delayed. Let's look at another hypothetical example. This time we're looking at a married couple named the Johnsons to see how coordination affects both outcomes. And it's important to note each person's unique situation. I want to make sure that we can comfortably understand each of their personal finances. So, Michael Johnson, Jennifer Johnson. They are each similar in ages, okay, but they have two different benefits. So if we look at the first strategy, which is where they both file early, they receive income sooner, but both benefits are permanently reduced. Survivor benefit is significantly lower, and the long term income is weaker. This is the default strategy many couples choose simply because they don't know their options. And then the second strategy, strategy B, is more of a coordinated approach. Jennifer, who's the lower earner, files earlier. Michael, who's the higher earner, delays until he's 70 years old. So the household income increases later in retirement, but also the survivor benefits become much stronger. The numbers in these examples aren't meant to apply directly to every person on this webinar or watching this because each person's situation is unique and could be different, but it does illustrate how coordination can create a meaningful difference in long term outcomes. Closer look at what this chart is really showing because this is where the impact of filing strategy becomes really clear. These numbers represent, again, hypothetical lifetime Social Security income for the Johnsons under the two different strategies we talked about. They're not predictions, again. They simply illustrate how timing affects the total benefits a household might receive over both lifetimes. So, if we're looking at strategy A, and again, this is where they both file early, they start getting money sooner, but both benefits, again, are permanently reduced. The survivor benefit is also much lower because it's based on Michael's reduced amount. And as a result, household income drops significantly when he passes away versus strategy B, where Jennifer files earlier and Michael delays. Michael's delayed retirement credits increase his benefit and the future survivor benefit Jennifer would receive. So over time, especially in the later years of retirement, this creates a higher combined lifetime benefit for the household. The most important part of this chart is the difference isn't just about the monthly amount today. It's about how benefits grow with inflation, how long the household may live between the two spouses, and what happens financially if one spouse outlives the other by potentially 10 to 20 years. Delaying the higher earner's benefit often strengthens the survivor benefit the most. And this chart, I think, really reflects that. A key takeaway, though, is both strategies quote unquote work, but one creates more long term stability and stronger income later in life. And for many couples, coordinating benefits, especially the higher earners filing age, can make a meaningful difference in long term financial security. Again, the exact numbers are hypothetical, but the pattern is consistent, and coordination tends to create stronger outcomes than making decisions independently. Now, let's talk about the all too important part of this that we cannot escape, and that is taxes, because Social Security can be taxable. Your taxability depends really on what's called your provisional income, and this includes your adjusted gross income, tax exempt interest. Yes, I'm sorry to tell you that. Just because it may be exempt from federal taxes doesn't mean that it doesn't impact how much of your Social Security benefits are taxed. So 50% of your Security benefits are typically considered taxable, or at least can be, depending on your values or different sources of income. Up to 85% of your benefits may be included in taxable income. So why does this matter? Because your filing age affects how much you withdraw from IRAs, how fast your investment accounts shrink, whether you hit Medicare IRMAA brackets, your tax bracket over time, your long term income plan. A Social Security decision is indirectly a tax decision, whether people realize it or not. And that's something people really need to understand, especially in light of things like potentially Roth conversions, RMDs, all the other things we just mentioned. You cannot, again, be looking at this in a vacuum without considering all those different factors as well, because they do impact it. And of course, there is the question of if you are still working while you start receiving benefits. So, if you do file early and you do keep working, Social Security may temporarily reduce your benefit if you exceed the earnings limit. But, and this is something people often misunderstand, those benefits aren't lost at full retirement age. Social Security recalculates and adjusts your benefit upward. And then after your full retirement age, you can work, and now with no earnings limit and no reduction. Work plans should always be considered before choosing a filing age. I think that's something people need to really understand, especially if they are working longer and longer these days. So, one of the most overlooked parts of Social Security planning is longevity. And I cannot tell you how many times I hear this. I sit in these appointments a lot where people are talking about their retirement, and they inevitably will bring up how long they think to live. Most people think that they're going to live only a certain number of years. And that may be true. It also may not be true. But the reality is, if you live a long life, even just into your mid 80s, not 90s or past that, delaying often produces much more total income, and many retirees today do live well into their 80s and 90s. Social Security is one of the few quote unquote guaranteed inflation adjusted lifetime income sources you can find. And I know many people would pause there and say, well, what about the future of Social Security? We all know that that has a number of question marks that we could spend a whole nother hour addressing. But as it stands today, it is at least guaranteed by the government and inflation adjusted, and is designed for lifetime income. So, delaying can act like a form of longevity insurance, strengthening your income in the years you're most likely to need stability. And so, this is, I would argue, one of the most important slides of the entire presentation. Frankly, if you paid only half attention to the rest of it, I hope you would at least pay attention to this part because it is so crucial. And I know I've already touched on this topic before, but I really want to drive this point home. Social Security should always, 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 always be coordinated with other income sources. And this is not an entire exhaustive list, but this is certainly some of the most important points. Some of the things that should be considered along with that are traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, taxable investment accounts, pensions, annuities, part time income, required minimum distribution, and so on and so forth. Why? Well, as we already touched on a moment ago, because everything interacts. They are all connected, even if they don't seem to be. So, for example, if you file early, you may not need to take as much from retirement accounts, but you may end up paying more taxes over your lifetime. If you delay benefits, you may strategically withdraw from retirement accounts earlier, which can lower future RMDs and Medicare surcharges. That's right. Medicare is something that should be considered when you're looking at this as well. Social Security is, in many cases, the backbone, but the rest of the plan would be the skeleton. They must work together. So I would encourage everyone who's contemplating making these decisions in the near future, please, please, please do not make them in isolation. Consider how they are all connected and how they all affect each other. And if you're not sure how, feel free to reach out to us at our website, matt25capital.com, or info at matt25capital.com, or some advisor if you already are working with one. So I think this is an important topic to cover, and these are the most common Social Security mistakes that people make that I hope the people watching this will avoid. So these consistently create what I would argue avoidable financial stress. And let me walk you through each one. So, number one, filing too early without analysis. Okay. And the consequence of doing that is you permanently reduce your benefits. You have smaller cost of living adjustments, weaker survivor benefits, and potentially lower lifetime income. And that's just to name a few, or at least the most important ones. The next most common mistake is not coordinating as a married couple. And what this does is not only reduce the total amount of household income, but you have suboptimal survivor benefits and you have missed opportunities for efficiency. The third most common mistake is overlooking the tax implications, like we were talking about. This results in higher taxes, unexpected Medicare surcharges, which many people don't factor in, as well as an inefficient withdrawal sequencing strategy. The fourth most common mistake we see is misunderstanding survivor benefits. And the obvious consequences there are the surviving spouse may experience a significant drop in monthly income for many, many years through the rest of their life. The fifth most common Social Security mistake we see is never revisiting the strategy. Outdated decisions that no longer match current life expectancy goals, health, or tax laws are some of just the main consequences or symptoms rather of really not revisiting this. This is not a set it and forget it. Avoiding this as well as the other mistakes can alone make materially major improvements to your retirement clarity and I would argue confidence. So, what's the value of professional guidance? Professional planning isn't about predicting the future. I can't tell you what the future is, only God knows what that is. But it is about helping you make more informed decisions so that you can have confidence in moving forward. And there are studies that have actually shown that coordinated Social Security strategies in hypothetical scenarios can add anywhere from 100 to $300,000 in lifetime value for some households. And again, that's not a guarantee, but it is just evidence of how impactful these decisions can be over time. And sometimes a person like myself, who's a CFP, can just connect the dots between things like Social Security and taxes and investments and healthcare and retirement income and spousal needs and survivor benefits and long term planning. And the list goes on and on and on. That comprehensive view, I would argue, is where the real value comes from. Because again, like we already mentioned, all of these different things are intertwined and connected. And if you can't or don't feel comfortable making those connections and playing them all in a cohesive, comprehensive manner, it's worthwhile to get someone who does this professionally and has the training and the experience in it. So, beyond Social Security, Comprehensive retirement planning is really, I would argue, what we're talking about. Social Security is important, but it's just one piece of a much larger picture. And a strong retirement plan should integrate and coordinate things like, what is your income strategy? What kind of proactive tax planning and mitigation are you doing? What kind of investment allocation and location are you doing to try and ensure longevity of assets, as well as reducing taxes while providing for lifestyle needs and perhaps one day a legacy? Medicare and healthcare. This is, I would argue, one of the most crucial things to consider when looking at Social Security and retirement in general, because people do care about these. Even very wealthy individuals I have worked with will time their retirement specifically around Medicare and healthcare planning. Long-term care considerations. For those of you who don't have familiarity in this area, long-term care can be one of the most expensive things you encounter in retirement. The average for some people in this country, depending on where you live and the level of care you get, can be anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 per person per year. If you don't have coverage for that, that means you're self-insuring. And some people will say, well, I'll just have the government pay for it. That's only if you qualify, which means you will have to have depleted the majority of your assets and resources or gifted them away long before you ever get to that point. And that's a whole other conversation. The point is, it's an important thing to consider. And we already talked about legacy, but estate planning is another thing that needs to be considered when you're talking through retirement planning as a whole. But also insurance, mitigating risk, cash flow, and budgeting. When all of these areas work together in a comprehensive, cohesive manner, that's when clients feel the most clarity and peace of mind and confidence moving forward. As a certified financial planner, I'll tell you right now, I'm held to high standards, and that's not just in one particular area. That's in education, examination, experience, and ethics. That means I have a fiduciary duty to my clients to do what's in their best interest. I have to go through comprehensive and extensive training. I have to do a lot of continuing education. I have a commitment to serve the best interests of my clients ahead of everyone and everything else. Social Security interacts with almost every area of your finances. So, as a CFP, what I try to bring is a framework that tries to ensure decisions are never made in isolation, but understanding the consequences of how those decisions will impact every other area of a person's financial life. So, if you watch this and you're interested in possibly taking the next step or getting some help, if you'd like help just reviewing your Social Security plan, we can walk through this. We do specialize in planning. There's a number of ways we can go about doing that, but here's a few things that we will walk through. Looking at people's earnings records, their spouse's benefits, filing age scenarios, tax considerations, long-term care projections, coordinating with your retirement accounts, and many other things as we already kind of discussed on this webinar. There's no obligation. It's just an educational consultation to see if we're mutually good fit and to see if we can add value to a situation. But ultimately, like I've said, the goal is clarity and confidence, not pressure. You're never going to get pressure from me one way or the other. So if you want to connect, you can email us directly at info@matt25capital.com, or you can call us directly at 832-966-0712. If you want more information about us and what we do, you can go to our website at matt25capital.com. So I thank you everyone for joining today. I hope you found this real informative and helpful. And just remember that Social Security is a meaningful decision, but it also comes with long-term financial implications. You deserve to make that decision with clarity and confidence so you're not leaving potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. So thank you again for joining. If you have any questions or you aren't sure where to start with so many different filing options, feel free to reach out and we'll get back to you as best we can, typically within 24 hours. Again, thank you all, and I hope you have a blessed day.